Time now for perspective. Ever since history teacher Samuel Paty was murdered by an 18-year-old Islamist extremist after showing his students cartoons of the Prophet Mohammed, a debate has been raging in France and now around the world about the nature of French secularism. Paty showed the cartoons as part of a lesson on freedom of expression, but should there be any limits on the right to offend here in France? My guest today is Rim-Sarah Alouane, an expert in public law and researcher at the University of Toulouse. Thank you very much indeed for being with us today on France 24. Now, France is, of course, a secular country, meaning its constitution guarantees the separation of church and state. It's also a founding principle that the French state holds especially dear. But what does French secularism mean for you? Because not everyone in France agrees on the meaning.
Good morning. Indeed, dealing with God and Caesar in France has always been tumultuous. To understand laicity and secularism, you need to understand the history of France and its relation with religion. First of all, one of our founding legislation is the law of 1905 on the separation of churches and state. However, nowhere in the law laicity is mentioned. For that, you have to to go back to 1882 on the Les Grandes Lois Laïques, the great laic laws regarding schools. The idea was to separate religious and, at that time, the Catholic Church, to stop its influence on state affairs, and the state should not interfere with religious affairs. So the idea was to remove any religious influence from, at that time, school. And when the law of 1905 passed, the idea was not to conceal religion or to prohibit religion, but really to guarantee state neutrality so that freedom of conscience and freedom of religion, freedom to believe, to not believe, to change religion can be protected.
Now, the French government says that laicite, secularism, is under threat in 2020. Do you agree?
It depends what do we mean by threat. The problem with laicite is if its historical ground remain undisputed, its legal definition, though, is not, and that's what causes issues. I don't think that laicite itself is is at stake. I actually more think we are going through an identity crisis, and laicite has been weaponized to lead that identity crisis and this fight. So laicite went from a very liberal concept, again, that guarantee religious freedom. Again, the religious neutrality applies to the state, to civil servant, not to the people, as long as they don't disturb public order. But today, some pundits, politicians, commentators are using laicite in a way to remove any religious visibility, and at the moment it's used against Muslims, which is exactly the problem. It goes against the very essence of laicity and against the essence of the law of 1905.
Now, of course, French President Emmanuel Macron has said that France is facing serious issues with radical Islam at the moment. He says there are certain groups of French society that do not believe in French values. You think that this isn't an issue, or you do, and that there should be a different set of tools employed to address it?
Of course, extremism has to be addressed, but I don't think, weaponizing laicite will actually help anything. The question is why, despite our very strong legal apparatus, I remind you that many elements of state of law emergencies were made into permanent law. Despite all of that, those terrorist attacks were not prevented. Why? So I think instead of really thinking about more prohibition of religious visibility, what can we do to tackle terrorism? And more importantly, what happened to our society? What is done to tackle discrimination? What is done to tackle racism? And also, how to unite the country, how to find solution for France to be united again and to protect our motto, liberty, equality, and fraternity? And how can we remove foreign influence on our religious institutions? So I think the question should really be what kind of country we want to be today. And I don't think that playing with words and the fuzziness against the word separatism itself, who creates separatism when discrimination are still very much alive in this country?
Now, in the wake of Samuel Paty's death a week and a half ago, some teachers in France have been saying they do often encounter a real opposition in their classrooms to so-called French values, equality between men and women, freedom of speech especially. Surely Paty's death shows that teachers in France do have a right to be worried.
Of course, absolutely. And the thing is, teachers have been worried for years. And unfortunately, the government response was not exactly efficient. And sometimes they even rejected those grievances. We need to give the mean to our schools. Like for many years, many administration, and it's not just the Macron's administration, it has been going on for 20 years. Public schools have been left. Less means, less tools were given. Teachers are working in very dire conditions. And unfortunately, in the aftermath of the latest events, what professors have been having calling out happened. So now what do we do to protect our public schools? What do we do to protect our teachers as well as our students and pupils? The government should really focus on, giving the means to public education and to national education. And again, the latest comments by the Minister of Education does not show that. So I'm afraid that nothing will be done and the situation will get worse. And I hope I'm wrong.
So the government's response to the recent spate of Islamist attacks in France is this new anti-radicalisation series of measures from Macron. What did you make of those measures?
Again, my problem with the latest announcement, and even before the horrific terrorist attack against Samuel Paty, is the vagueness of the discourse. First of all, we talk about separatism. Like I mentioned previously, in law, separatism doesn't mean much. And this vagueness can open a Pandora box to state abuse, and especially against civil liberties. And there is what I noticed is a gap between Macron's announcements, which indeed talk about radical Islams, extremists, etc., and his administration response, which sometimes, are at odds with the president's announcement. So, for example, Macron indeed tackled extremism. The next day, the Minister of Interior started to be worried about ethnic food aisles, which, according to him, help separatism. So, it's more the fuzziness, and this fuzziness opened the door to reactionary comments. And again, I'm just afraid that we are forgetting to abide by the rule of law, because it's in time of crisis that the rule of law and civil liberties must be protected more than ever. And right now, I do not see that.
Okay, Rim-Sarah Alouane, expert in public law and researcher at the University of Toulouse. Thank you very much indeed for speaking to us here on France 24 today.